I need a mother, you need a home. I still remember those words, spoken by a little girl who was barely 7, sitting on the curb at the bus stop. Her small voice was soft, almost shy, but it cut through the cold morning air like a gentle, heartbreaking truth. I was standing there, my backpack slung over one shoulder, trying to make sense of my own life, my own troubles. And suddenly, this tiny human looked up at me with big brown eyes and said exactly what I didn't know I needed to hear. I froze. I didn't know what to say at first. My own world had been falling apart for months. My apartment was gone, my job was uncertain, and I felt more invisible every day. And there she was, a little girl with a worn coat too big for her, holding a stuffed rabbit that had clearly seen better days, telling me in the most innocent way that I was missing something she thought I could give her. The bus rumbled past, shaking the pavement under our feet, but the noise didn't matter. All I could hear were her words echoing in my head. I need a mother, you need a home. And somehow in that moment the universe felt smaller, more fragile, yet maybe a little kinder too. I wanted to look away, to keep moving, to pretend this was just a coincidence. But I couldn't. I watched her clutch her rabbit tighter, her gaze never leaving me, and I realized that we were both searching for something bigger than ourselves, something we thought we had lost forever. I'm Emily Thompson. I was 24 when that little girl spoke to me at the bus stop, but at the time I felt much older. Life had a way of teaching you lessons before you were ready for them, and I had learned more in those months than I thought I ever would. My apartment had been small, a one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an aging building in Boston, but it was mine, or at least I had thought it was. Rent was rising faster than my paycheck, and the building's heater barely worked. Nights were long, and sometimes I'd lie awake listening to the pipes groan, wondering how I had ended up here. I had a job at a small bookstore downtown, a place I loved because it smelled of old pages and coffee, but even that couldn't keep me afloat. Before all this, I had friends. I had a family in a way. My parents, divorced when I was 12, had drifted apart more than I realized. My mom lived in Connecticut. My dad lived in upstate New York. Visits were rare, phone calls even rarer. They both loved me, I think, but life had its way of pulling people apart. By the time I was 23, I felt like I was standing alone in the middle of a storm with no one to reach for. It was during that storm that I first noticed her, the little girl. Her name was Sophie. I learned that later, after the first few awkward mornings at the bus stop. But that first day, I only knew her as the small figure sitting cross-legged, hugging her rabbit with eyes that seemed too big for her face. She was watching me as if she could see right into the cracks of my life. I remember thinking it was strange. How could a 7-year-old know? How could she see that my world was unraveling while I pretended to hold it together? I didn't answer her that day. I didn't even speak. I just sat a few feet away on the bench, my mind spinning. But I kept looking at her, at that tiny, brave little person who somehow seemed stronger than me. Sophie didn't have a mother, or at least, not one she could count on. She lived with her grandma in a small, drafty apartment across town. Her grandma worked long hours as a nurse and was often too exhausted to do more than prepare a quick dinner and send Sophie to bed. The little girl's father had left when she was 3. Her mother had disappeared from her life for reasons I never fully understood. Sophie was used to waiting, to being alone, to fending for herself in ways no child should. I remember the first time I saw her eat. She had a small paper bag with a sandwich that looked like it had been made 2 days ago. She unwrapped it carefully, almost ceremoniously, and I could see she was savoring every bite like she didn't know when she would have another one. My heart ached. I wanted to do something, anything, to help, but I didn't know what. I had my own struggles, my own emptiness. And yet something inside me stirred, a feeling I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just sympathy. It was connection. It was a recognition that life had a way of leaving people behind, and maybe, just maybe, we could help each other carry the weight. I had been living paycheck to paycheck, constantly worried about where I would sleep next week or how I would make rent, but for the first time in a long while, I felt the stirrings of purpose. I started noticing her little habits, the way she would straighten her rabbit's ears before placing it on her lap, the way she always brought a book from the library, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, and would read silently, whispering the words to herself, the way she would hum quietly while waiting for the bus. And always, always, the way she would look at me with those big brown eyes, as if trying to say something she couldn't put into words. It took a few weeks before we really spoke. The first time I spoke to Sophie, it was almost accidental. She had dropped her rabbit and it rolled under my bench. "Here," I said, handing it back. She looked up, startled. "Thank you," she whispered, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something, trust. "I'm Emily," I said, smiling softly. "I'm Sophie," she replied, clutching the rabbit like it was a shield. "You need a home." I laughed nervously, not sure if she was joking. "No," she said firmly, tilting her head. "You really do. I need a mommy. You need a home. That's why we can help each other." I felt my chest tight. I didn't know what to say. Could a 7-year-old really understand what I was feeling? And yet there it was, laid bare in her small voice, a truth I had been avoiding, pretending not to see. From that day, our mornings changed. I started looking forward to the bus stop, not because I was excited about the commute, but because of her. I wanted to know her story, to be a part of it, and in a strange, unexpected way, she wanted to be part of mine. We began to talk in small ways at first, about books, about school, about her rabbit, Mr. Fluffles, who seemed to be a character in our mornings. Then we shared little pieces of ourselves. I told her about my apartment, how small and cold it had become. She told me about her grandma, about the long nights and the missing parents. Each story was a thread weaving us together in a tapestry neither of us had expected. But life wasn't simple. I was still struggling, still trying to keep my head above water. I didn't have much, and sometimes I feared that opening my life to someone else, even someone as small and innocent as Sophie, would make it all come crashing down. But every time I looked at her, I realized that maybe sharing the burden could make it lighter. And so, morning after morning, we met at the bus stop. The city moved around us, buses rushed past, people hurried with their coffee and their schedules, oblivious to the small, fragile connection forming on a cracked sidewalk bench. And in that quiet, unassuming place, 2 lonely souls began to find a little warmth. The mornings at the bus stop had become routine, but life outside those few hours was far from simple. Emily Thompson, me, was barely keeping afloat. My little apartment was crumbling faster than I could patch it, and the landlord had begun sending more urgent notices about overdue rent. Each day, I woke with a pit in my stomach, wondering whether I would have a roof over my head the next week. And Sophie was like a spark of light in that storm. She brought warmth I hadn't realized I was missing, yet her presence also reminded me of everything I didn't have. There were days when I wished I could just run away from the responsibility of caring for someone else, even someone so innocent. But then I would see her smile, or watch her carefully tuck Mr. Fluffles under her arm, and I couldn't turn away. One morning, as the city hummed with traffic and distant construction noise, Sophie arrived with a look of unease I hadn't seen before. Her tiny hands clutched her backpack straps tightly, and her eyes darted around, searching. "Are you okay, Sophie?" I asked gently. She shook her head. "Grandma, she's not feeling well. She said I have to stay home and take care of her." I felt a pang of worry. Sophie was too young to be worrying about an adult's health, yet here she was, carrying that burden without complaint. "Do you need me to, I don't know, come over?" I asked hesitantly. She shook her head again, biting her lip. "No, I have to be responsible. I'm the big girl." I wanted to protest, to tell her that a 7-year-old shouldn't have to be responsible for anyone, let alone a sick adult. But I didn't. Instead, I nodded, keeping my voice soft. "Okay, Sophie, be careful, all right?" That day, I couldn't concentrate at work. My mind kept drifting to her, imagining her sitting in a dim apartment, trying to care for her grandma while still doing homework, brushing teeth, and folding the few clothes they had. I wanted to help, but my own life was unraveling. I felt powerless, frustrated, and guilty, all at the same time. As weeks passed, small problems began to pile on. Sophie's grandma was often too tired to prepare meals, and Sophie came to the bus stop with a small lunch or nothing at all. I started sneaking snacks from my own lunch bag to give her, which meant I often went hungry too. My bank account was stretched thin, and every dollar spent on her felt like a gamble. But I couldn't let her go hungry, not when she looked at me with that mix of trust and hope in her eyes. One evening, after a long shift at the bookstore, I returned to my apartment to find a notice on my door. "Eviction notice, pay within 72 hours or vacate." My stomach dropped. I sank onto the floor, the letter trembling in my hands. I had nowhere else to go. I thought about calling my parents, but the thought made me feel even smaller. I couldn't ask them to solve my problems, not again. I was on my own. The next morning, Sophie noticed immediately that something was off. I had been quieter than usual at the bus stop, and my smile was forced. "Emily, are you okay?" she asked, her small voice hesitant. I forced a nod, trying to sound normal. "I'm fine, Sophie, really. Just tired," but she wasn't fooled. "You're not fine," she said, eyes wide. Did you lose your home?" I couldn't answer, my throat tightened. I looked down at her, and in that moment the weight of my struggles and hers pressed down on me so hard I almost collapsed. I wanted to cry, but I swallowed it back. "It's complicated," I whispered. Sophie nodded slowly, as if understanding more than she should. Maybe I can help," she said quietly. "You helped me, I can help you." I laughed softly, despite the ache in my chest. "Sophie, it's not like that." But she didn't let it go. "You need a home, Emily. I need a mommy. Maybe we can fix it together." Her words, innocent and simple, cut deeper than anything I had experienced. She didn't understand the magnitude of my problems, yet somehow she offered a solution, her solution in the purest way possible. It was humbling. Over the following weeks, my life became a balancing act. Days at the bookstore stretched into late nights, evenings spent scouring online listings for apartments I couldn't afford. I began skipping meals to save money. I worried constantly about eviction. At the same time, Sophie's needs never slowed. She needed a safe place to stay, a warm meal, help with homework, and someone to listen. I loved her company, but it became exhausting, and there were moments when I felt like I was failing both of us. One afternoon, a conflict came to a head. Sophie had been unusually quiet, dragging her feet at the bus stop. Finally, she whispered, almost as if afraid I would scold her. "Emily, Grandma says I can't come see you anymore." I felt my stomach drop. "Why?" I asked gently, trying to keep my voice calm. "She says I shouldn't spend time with someone who doesn't have a stable home, that it's dangerous," she said, tears welling up. I wanted to argue, to tell her that our bond was more important than any apartment, any rule. But I also knew she was only repeating what adults had told her. I felt my heart break. "Sophie, I understand," I whispered, my own eyes stinging. "But it's not dangerous, not with me, I promise." She shook her head, hugging Mr. Fluffles to her chest. I can't, Emily, I'm sorry." That was the first time I felt the true weight of our situation. I couldn't give her the security she deserved, and yet I couldn't walk away. It was like being caught in a storm with no shelter, and the person you cared for most standing in the rain beside you. Days turned into weeks. I tried to find temporary solutions, offering to help her homework over the phone, leaving little packages of snacks at the bus stop, texting her gentle encouragements. But nothing replaced the closeness we had developed. I could see the disappointment in her eyes, and it was unbearable. Meanwhile, my eviction loomed closer. I went to every possible resource: shelters, housing programs, friends who might lend a room, but doors kept closing. Some offered help that felt conditional or humiliating. Others were simply full. Each rejection chipped away at my hope, leaving me raw and exhausted. Then came a night when everything seemed to collapse. I was at the bookstore, organizing a display for the morning, when my boss told me my hours were being cut. "We just can't keep you full-time anymore, Emily. I'm so sorry." I nodded numbly, my mind spinning. Reduced hours meant even less money, which meant I couldn't pay rent, which meant eviction was inevitable. I walked home in silence, the winter wind biting my face, and for the first time I felt completely alone. The next morning, Sophie arrived at the bus stop, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She looked at me, eyes wide, and I could see she sensed my despair. "Emily, you look sad," she said softly. I'm okay," I said, trying to force a smile. But it didn't reach my eyes. She tilted her head, studying me, and then whispered, "I wish I could help." It was all I could do not to crumble in front of her. I knelt to her level, holding her small hands in mine. "Sophie, you already help. You make me stronger just by being here." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't enough. Our worlds were too fragile, too broken, and each day felt like walking on thin ice, one wrong step away from disaster. The tension kept building. Every conversation, every morning at the bus stop was layered with fear and unspoken worries. Could I find a home in time? Could I protect Sophie from disappointment and loss? Could I keep myself from falling apart while trying to hold her together? Then came the day that changed everything. A call from my landlord. "You need to move out by tomorrow. No extensions." My heart sank. I didn't know where to go. I didn't have anywhere. And as I sat on the curb later, staring at the empty street, I realized that this was more than a financial crisis. It was the moment when survival and hope collided, and I had no idea how to navigate it. Sophie arrived that afternoon, sensing something was wrong. She knelt beside me on the cold concrete, tugging gently at my sleeve. "Emily, what's wrong?" I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. I might not have a home tomorrow," I whispered. Her eyes widened. Then we have to fix it." "Together," she said, voice trembling but determined. That was the moment the rising conflict hit its peak. Not a single dramatic explosion, but the slow, painful crescendo of fear, responsibility, and the fragility of two lives intertwined. We were both small in the face of the storm, yet neither of us willing to let go. And in that quiet, desperate moment, I realized that the storm was far from over. It wasn't just about finding a home or surviving the week. It was about whether we could keep each other safe, emotionally and physically, while the world seemed determined to push us apart. I had been avoiding the inevitable for days. The eviction notice sat on my kitchen counter like a ticking bomb, a constant reminder that everything I'd been holding together was about to collapse. Every attempt to find temporary housing had failed. Shelters were full, friends were out of town, and I couldn't bring myself to ask my parents. I felt like a failure, not just for myself, but for Sophie. Just saying her name made my chest tighten. I had grown so attached to that little girl that her absence in my life was unimaginable. And yet, every day I was reminded of the impossibility of our situation. She deserved stability. She deserved a home with a mother who could be there for her without fear or uncertainty. And I couldn't give her that. The morning of the crisis began like any other. I met Sophie at the bus stop, but she was quieter than usual, her usual sparkle dimmed. I noticed the way her fingers fidgeted with Mr. Fluffles, twisting the soft rabbit's ears over and over. "Emily," she said hesitantly. "Are you okay?" I forced a smile, my stomach twisting into knots. "I'm fine, Sophie, really." But she didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, and then she said something I'll never forget. "Grandma said I might have to go live somewhere else if you don't have a home." That sentence hit me harder than anything before. My heart sank, my hands went cold, and for the first time I truly felt the weight of the impossible choice I was facing. If I didn't find a place to live soon, Sophie could be taken away, sent somewhere safe but completely unknown to me. And worse, she might think it was my fault. I tried to distract her that morning, suggesting we walk to the park after the bus ride, but every moment was overshadowed by the looming fear. By noon, I was pacing my tiny apartment, frantically searching every possible option online. Nothing seemed feasible. Rent was too high, shelters were full. The clock was ticking. Around mid-afternoon, Sophie's grandma called. I braced myself, trying to sound calm. "Emily, I don't know what to do," she said, voice strained. "Sophie needs stability, and you're struggling. I don't want her to be hurt." I felt tears sting my eyes. "I know, Mrs. Harper. I just don't want to lose her. I'm trying. I promise I'm trying." "I understand, Emily, but I'm scared too. She's 7. She can't be caught in the middle of this." The words cut like a knife. I knew she was right, but it didn't make it any easier. I loved that little girl with a fierceness I hadn't felt in years, and I couldn't let her slip away. By late afternoon, the tension was unbearable. I had packed a few belongings into a bag, unsure where I would go, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath me. And then Sophie came home early from school. I wasn't expecting her. "Emily," she called softly, peeking into my apartment through the half-open door. I wanted to see you before what?" I didn't want to finish the sentence in my head. I swallowed hard and gestured for her to come in. She stepped inside, glancing around my small space with curious, wary eyes. "It's cozy," she said quietly. I laughed, though it was hollow. "Cozy is exactly the word I'd use, but it's home for now." Sophie looked down at Mr. Fluffles, then back up at me. "Emily, what if you don't have a home tomorrow?" I swallowed hard, feeling panic rise. Then we'll figure it out, somehow." But even as I said it, I knew the truth. Figure it out felt impossibly vague. We were both on the brink of losing everything, me my apartment, her the tiny sense of stability she had left. and I had no idea how to protect either of us. Then came the phone call that would change everything. It was my landlord, short, clipped, final, pack up and leave, no extensions, no exceptions. I dropped the phone, heart racing, and sat on the couch, staring blankly at the walls. The walls that had been my sanctuary, my fragile attempt at a home, now felt suffocating. My eyes filled with tears, and I felt a panic I hadn't known since I was a teenager sleeping in cars between parents' homes. Sophie, standing nearby, reached out and took my hand. "Emily, it's okay. We'll find a home." Her words, brave and determined, were so small, so fragile, yet they struck a chord deep in me. How could a 7-year-old be the one giving me hope when I felt so hopeless? That evening, I made a decision. I couldn't sit and wait for the world to decide for us. I had to act. I called every friend, every shelter, every social service I could think of. I asked for advice. I begged for help. And then something miraculous happened. A woman from a local housing nonprofit returned my call. She listened patiently as I explained my situation. "Emily," she said finally, "we might have a temporary placement for you and a child your age. It's not ideal, but it's safe. We can get you there by tomorrow." I didn't hesitate. Yes, please." The rest of the night was a blur of packing, planning, and trying to calm Sophie's anxieties. She clung to me, whispering, "Are you sure it's okay? Are we really going to be together?" I held her close. "We're going to be together, I promise." For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long while: hope, fragile, uncertain, but real. The next morning, we arrived at the temporary placement. It was a small apartment, much smaller than my old place, but it was warm. It was safe. And most importantly, it was ours. Sophie ran to the small bed in the corner, placing Mr. Fluffles carefully on the pillow. "It's nice," she said, a soft smile spreading across her face. I knelt beside her, brushing her hair back gently. "It's more than nice, it's home." For a few quiet minutes, we just sat there, letting the weight of the past weeks wash over us. The fear, the uncertainty, the exhaustion, all of it seemed to pause, suspended in the warm sunlight coming through the small window. It wasn't perfect. We still had bills to pay, work to do, and the looming question of what came next. But we were together, and in that moment, that was enough. The turning point wasn't a single dramatic event like in a movie. It was a series of choices, small, desperate, and brave, that led us to a place where we could finally breathe. Sophie's trust in me, my determination to protect her, and the kindness of strangers combined to create a moment of fragile triumph. As I tucked Sophie into bed that night, I whispered softly, "We made it, Sophie. We're safe for now." And she looked up at me, sleepy eyes wide and trusting, and whispered, "Thank you, Emily, for being my mommy." I held back tears, unsure how to respond. The words were too heavy, too beautiful. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "And thank you for helping me find my home." In that moment, I realized something profound. Life doesn't always give us what we want, but sometimes it gives us exactly what we need. The turning point wasn't about losing or finding. It was about finally seeing that even in the midst of chaos, love and hope could guide us. The first few days in the temporary apartment were quiet, almost surreal. I had never imagined I would feel this kind of relief, but the walls of this small space, though bare and modest, felt like a sanctuary. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't permanent, but it was safe. And for the first time in months, I could breathe without the constant, gnawing anxiety of eviction pressing against my chest. Sophie explored the apartment carefully, moving from room to room as if she were testing its boundaries, discovering corners where shadows softened and light fell just right. She placed Mr. Fluffles on the bed, then climbed up beside him, looking around with wide, thoughtful eyes. "It's cozy," she whispered, echoing her words from before. "It is," I said softly, smiling. "And it's ours, at least for now," she nodded, her eyes serious. "I like it here." And in that simple statement, I felt a warmth I hadn't known in months. For the first time, I truly understood what home meant, not just a roof over our heads, but a place where we felt safe, where we could rest, and where trust and love existed, even in small doses. The days that followed were filled with a careful rhythm. I returned to work, though my hours were still reduced, and I managed our modest meals, sometimes stretching ingredients to make them last longer than they should. Sophie adjusted too, helping in her small, careful ways. She would fold laundry, set the table, and even organize her little corner of the apartment, as if she understood that keeping order around us could calm some of the chaos inside. We began reading together in the evenings. Sophie's favorite was Charlotte's Web, which we read aloud, slowly alternating chapters. I would watch her small face light up at moments of triumph and sadness, and I realized that our bond was deepening in ways that were both tender and unspoken. She trusted me in ways I hadn't thought possible for someone so young, and in turn, she gave me a sense of responsibility that grounded me, reminding me why I had fought so hard to keep her in my life. Evenings were also filled with quiet talks. Sophie would share stories about her grandma, how she worked long shifts, how she sometimes cried quietly when Sophie wasn't around. I listened, offering comfort and guidance where I could. And slowly I began to see her fears less as burdens and more as a reflection of her strength. She was resilient beyond her years, and she inspired me in ways I couldn't have anticipated. But life wasn't entirely without conflict. Even in this temporary sanctuary, the tension of instability lingered. There were nights when I lay awake, wondering how long we could stay, worrying about bills, and wondering if Sophie's grandma would demand her back if our circumstances didn't improve. I tried to hide this worry from Sophie, but children are perceptive. She would often tug at my hand and ask softly, "Emily, are we really safe?" And each time I would hold her close and answer as honestly as I could, "We're safe right now, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure we stay safe." We also faced the challenge of community and social workers checking in. Sophie's situation was under careful observation because she was technically at risk. There were meetings, phone calls, and forms to fill out. Sometimes I felt judged, as if our struggles were evidence of failure rather than circumstance. But I reminded myself that we were doing the best we could, and I explained to Sophie that some adults in our lives were only trying to help. Slowly, she learned to accept support without fear, understanding that needing help didn't make her weak. One afternoon, Sophie and I were sitting at the small kitchen table, coloring in a notebook, when she suddenly looked up at me. "Emily, do you think we could be a family?" I froze. Her words carried so much weight, and my heart ached with both love and uncertainty. I took her small hand in mine. "Sophie, I think we already are a family in a way that matters." Families aren't just about blood or houses. They're about caring for each other, sticking together, and loving each other no matter what. Her face lit up with a smile, shy but genuine. "So you're my mommy?" I felt tears prick at my eyes. I can try, Sophie. I can do my best, and I promise to always be here for you." That day, something shifted. It wasn't magical and it wasn't sudden, but there was a tangible sense of belonging between us. Sophie felt it, I felt it, and for the first time, the heavy shadow of fear that had hovered over our lives began to lift, even if only slightly. We began creating small rituals that made the apartment feel more like a home. Saturday mornings became pancake mornings, flour, eggs, and syrup scattered across the counter, with Sophie giggling as batter splashed everywhere. Evenings included storytelling and small games we invented. Little by little, the apartment filled with laughter, small joys, and the fragile but powerful threads of connection. Through all of this, I learned lessons I hadn't expected. I learned that strength doesn't always look like bravado or independence. It sometimes looks like persistence, patience, and the willingness to show vulnerability. Sophie taught me resilience, and I realized that I had been capable of more than I thought. We were both learning from each other, shaping a new reality in which hope and love existed side by side with struggle. There were setbacks, too. Bills were still tight. Work was uncertain. Some nights I would lie awake worrying about the future, and Sophie would sense my tension. "Emily, you're worried again," she'd whisper, and I would take a deep breath, reminding myself that showing her fear wasn't the same as abandoning her. "I'm worried," I'd admit, "but we'll get through it together." School continued to be a challenge for Sophie as well. She sometimes struggled to keep up with homework, especially when she was tired from caring for her grandma or adjusting to new routines. I helped her, staying up late to explain math problems or read assignments aloud. Those nights were exhausting, but watching her light up when she understood something on her own made every hour worth it. We even began to dream together. Not extravagant dreams, just small ones. A better apartment, a small pet we could care for, summer trips to the park, birthdays celebrated properly. Each dream was a step toward healing and stability, a declaration that despite our past hardships, life could be gentle and generous if we gave ourselves the chance to believe. Months passed, and slowly the temporary apartment began to feel permanent. Emily Thompson, the young woman who had felt invisible and powerless, discovered that stability didn't always come from external circumstances. It came from the relationships we nurtured and the love we allowed ourselves to feel. Sophie, the little girl who had once been carrying the weight of the world on her small shoulders, learned that she could trust someone completely, and that love didn't always have conditions. One evening, as we sat together on the small couch, Sophie resting her head on my shoulder while we watched the sun set through the window, I realized how far we had come. We weren't perfect. Life still held uncertainties. But for the first time, I felt like we had reclaimed something precious, a sense of family, hope, and belonging. "I'm glad I met you, Emily," Sophie whispered softly, her voice full of sincerity. I hugged her tightly, feeling her small frame against me. "Me too, Sophie. More than you'll ever know." And in that embrace, I understood that resolution isn't about everything being fixed. It's about finding peace in the midst of imperfection, love in the midst of struggle, and hope in the midst of uncertainty. We were not just surviving anymore, we were learning to live together. The months following our move into the temporary apartment passed in a blur of quiet growth. Each day was a small victory, waking up without fear of being evicted, sharing meals that didn't feel rushed, hearing Sophie laugh without worry shadowing her eyes. Life wasn't perfect. Bills still loomed, work remained unpredictable, and the world outside our little apartment could still feel cold and unforgiving. But inside, a warmth had settled, A sense of home that couldn't be measured in square footage or furniture, but in love, trust, and shared resilience. Sophie had grown more confident. She still had moments of worry, the occasional tear when she thought of her grandma or her scattered family life, but she began to blossom. Her smiles were brighter, her laughter more frequent, and her curiosity boundless. One afternoon, as she was drawing a picture of our apartment in her notebook, she paused and looked up at me. "Emily, do you think we'll always be together?" she asked, a small frown knitting her brows. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I can't promise forever, Sophie," I said gently, "because life is unpredictable. But I can promise you this: I will always care for you, always do my best for you, and always be here as long as I can." She smiled, and in that moment I realized how much we had both learned about trust, love, and hope. Life hadn't been fair to either of us, but together we had created something stronger than circumstance, a family of choice. Work remained a challenge. My hours at the bookstore slowly increased, and I even began tutoring some students part-time to bring in a little extra money. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't enough to cover all expenses, but it was honest work, and it gave me a sense of pride. I wasn't just surviving, I was building a foundation for the future, step by step. Sophie's school life improved too. I helped her with homework each evening, and slowly she began to catch up, her confidence growing with each assignment completed. Sometimes we would sit together at the kitchen table, laughing at math problems we got wrong, cheering when we got them right. Those small victories reminded me that progress isn't always about big leaps. It's about consistent effort, patience, and celebrating each step forward. Our routines became our lifeline. Pancake Saturdays continued. Storytelling nights evolved into quiet reading marathons and little adventures, like walks to the local park or trips to the library, turned ordinary moments into memories we cherished. Sophie's presence had transformed my life, and in turn, my love and care had transformed hers. We were no longer two lost souls meeting at a bus stop. We were a unit, a small, imperfect family learning to navigate the world together. One evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep with Mr. Fluffles tucked beside her, I sat quietly in the dim light of our living room, reflecting on how far we had come. I thought about the mornings at the bus stop, the struggles with eviction, the nights of worry and fear. And I realized something profound. Life does not always give us what we want, but it often gives us what we need. Sophie had given me purpose, a reason to fight even when everything seemed hopeless. I had given her safety, stability, and love. Together, we had created something neither of us could have done alone. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. And in the reality of our lives, we had found beauty, connection, and hope. There were moments when I caught myself marveling at the simple fact of her existence in my life. I would watch her playing with Mr. Fluffles, humming quietly to herself, and think, how did I ever get so lucky? And then I would remember that luck wasn't the only force at play. It was determination, compassion, and a willingness to keep going, even when the odds seemed stacked against us. We began to dream bigger. Not extravagant dreams, but achievable ones. A slightly larger apartment one day, more stable income, summer trips to the beach, maybe even adopting a small pet when the time was right. Each plan was tentative, but it was ours, and it represented hope, a belief that the future could be brighter than the past. Sophie and I also started reconnecting with the people in our lives who could support us. Her grandma remained a presence, though limited by her long shifts, and we began visiting her more regularly, finding ways to balance responsibilities and care. I reached out to distant relatives I had long ignored, slowly rebuilding connections and support networks. Each relationship added a layer of stability and reassurance, reminding us that we weren't entirely alone in the world. Through it all, I learned that family isn't just defined by biology. It's defined by love, by care, by showing up for one another, and by choosing to stay when it's hard. Sophie had chosen to trust me, and I had chosen to protect her. That choice, the willingness to invest in someone else's life, despite fear and uncertainty, had transformed us both. Years later, when I think back to that morning at the bus stop, I still hear her small voice. "I need a mother, you need a home." Those words were simple, almost childlike, but they carried a truth I could never have imagined. They reminded me that love can come from the most unexpected places, that connection can form in the smallest moments, and that even in the midst of hardship, hope can flourish. We had both been searching for something. She for a mother, I for a home, and in each other we had found both. The journey had been difficult, filled with fear, doubt, and struggle, but it had also been filled with courage, resilience, and the quiet strength that comes from facing life together. As I tuck Sophie into bed now, I whisper softly, "Good night, my little one. Sleep well and know that you are safe, loved, and cherished." She smiles, eyes closing slowly, and I feel a deep, unshakable peace. I know the world will continue to challenge us. There will be obstacles, setbacks, and fears yet to face. But I also know this: no matter what happens, we have each other. We have our bond, our home, and our love. And that is enough to keep going. That is enough to endure, to hope, and to dream. Life isn't perfect. It never will be. But sometimes, in the quiet moments of shared laughter, whispered reassurances, and gentle hugs, we find what we truly need: belonging, connection, and the knowledge that we are not alone. And in those moments, I am grateful. Grateful for Sophie, for the small apartment that shelters us, for the lessons we've learned, and for the hope that tomorrow, no matter what it brings, will be another day we face together. Because family isn't always about where you come from. Sometimes it's about who chooses to stay, and sometimes that choice changes everything.